Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for spending time with me again today. I'm very excited today to be chatting with Deborah Coetzee. Deborah, please will you tell us a little bit more about your business and why you started it?
Well, I have spent my entire career, I started off in food safety. So obviously food safety systems, making sure the food you eat is safe to eat. And as a natural progression to that, I got hauled into all the health and safety issues. And so eventually decided just to do a qualification in health and safety. And about 10 years ago, really got stuck in and was the group manager for an agricultural business and did all the food safety and health and safety systems for them. And then I decided to go on my own it was a personal issue that came up, and started my own business. And yeah, I'm very passionate about it, and I believe that it's something that everybody needs to take cognizance of.
Now, we were just chatting before we started about the fact that many South African businesses don't pay enough attention to this part of their businesses. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I think it's a combination of either don't know, have absolutely no clue that there is a law surrounding health and safety, occupational health and safety, and very often it's a case of they do know that there is a law, but as long as we can get away with not doing anything, we'll get away with it. So when it comes to the moral and ethical reasons for having health and safety in place, that gets lost along the wayside somewhere. I think it's also because of the belief that it's going to cost too much money until, of course, somebody gets seriously injured or dies, in which case you lose your business and it'll cost you a hell of a lot more.
Now, I spoke to somebody about this topic many years ago, and she said something interesting to me, and if you could perhaps just expand on this for me. She mentioned that in terms of South African law, it is the one place where you are assumed guilty until you can prove yourself innocent, is if somebody is injured in your workplace as a business owner. Is this true?
Correct, yes. The law very clearly states that you as the CEO or owner of a business are 100% responsible for the health and safety, not just of your employees, but anybody that your business affects. So that could be neighbors, it could be visitors, contractors. And the law covers all of those aspects, in terms of keeping people safe and healthy when it comes to your business. So if something happens, yes, the onus is on you to prove that you did everything you could. They refer to that there's a phrase which is reasonably practicable. So the law gives you an out there in that if it's something that you couldn't possibly have been expected as a common person to have known or to have even pursued, then that would be your only out. But yes, you are guilty until proven innocent, for sure.
Wow, that's quite a heavy responsibility, and I think a lot of business owners are not quite aware of it. So even if you don't have staff, you still need to be aware of the laws.
Yes, because the law covers. Okay, so you're looking at you've got to have a safe work environment for you and your employees. Obviously, if it's just you do still need to make it safe for yourself, and I'm sure you would. You have to have safe systems of work. So in other words, all of the systems that you have, like if you're in manufacturing clothing, it would be your sewing machines, it would be all your presses, machineries, and what have you. But it extends to whatever you sell or manufacture. So that in the design of whatever it is that you sell or manufacture, that has to be safe when used as it should be used. So in other words, the easy example, the car. We had that issue with the Ford vehicle that started catching a light and people's cars were damaged. Well, if somebody got injured or in as a result of that, you as a manufacturer would be held liable because of the design or because there was a fault in the manufacture. So it really is quite all encompassing when it comes to that. Also, if you manufacture something that has regulation attached to it, so in other words, a South African national regulation in terms of its design, in terms of its specifications, if you don't adhere to those specifications and that regulation and something goes wrong and one of your customers gets injured or damaged, that they can prosecute under the law.
Wow. That's
Mm.
pretty heavy, and it sounds like it's quite detailed. It really does sound as though it is worth calling in an expert to come and look at your business and audit your business in respect of health and safety, to just figure out, what needs to be covered. I'm just thinking in terms of a previous business I had where I was selling craft kits. What if somebody who bought the kit got hurt as a result of working with hot water, which is required by the kit? So I could have been liable in that case.
Yes. So the law requires, essentially what the law requires is that you first identify what hazards are possible,
Okay.
whether it be in your workplace or with your product or whatever it is. Then you have to assess what's the possibility of the risk happening.
Mm.
So, for example, if you are manufacturing toys, the small parts you would need to put on your product that there are small parts that are not suitable for children under the age of 5 or whatever it is. Then you have to put in a control mechanism to make sure that the hazard or the risk is reduced or eliminated to what is acceptable. So yes, in terms of if you are instructing people to use hot water, you would probably need to put in your instruction label, beware when handling hot water, as it can be dangerous or whatever it is. So yes, you would to actually add something into your instructions to health and safety.
Okay, so it's not about necessarily taking things away, but about being very, very clear and open with your customers what the risks are, stating them up front and making sure they can find out what they are and how to mitigate them.
Correct. Yes, how to protect themselves against the risk. The law also requires, because a big section of the law, it's actually a very small section, but it says a lot, and that is your duty to inform. So essentially, when it comes to your workers, you need to inform them of the hazards and the risks, but also how to control them. And the same would go for any of your products. You need to inform are any hazards, risks, and what your part would need to be controlling them. And part of that would be in terms of how to use the product. So when it specifically states when properly used. So if you're giving an instruction as to how to use it properly and they don't, then you covered, you're safe. But if you don't tell them how to properly use it, then the chances are that it could come back to you.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't read the instructions, do they?
No, but then that's on them, because the first law under health and safety is take care of your own health and safety and that of those around you. So yeah, there is an onus on people following into with the instruction is there and it's been handed over and they choose to ignore it, then you clear.
Okay. So really there is responsibility on both parties.
Correct.
It's not just up to the supplier to do everything. The consumer is also responsible for their own behavior.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
don't put it all on your head.
Okay, and one of the reasons I asked you to chat with me today is because you mentioned that in clothing factories, you do work to support them. So how would a clothing factory set up a system that would protect themselves and their workers?
Well, clothing factory or any manufacturer, any business, in fact, your first port of call is to identify all the hazards. So all the possible things that could create a problem for your workers, yourself, your visitors. And then assess the risk. So you have to do a risk assessment. And a lot of people say, legal compliance, you just need a few documents, but our laws in South Africa are not 100% prescriptive. They are guidelines. So, for example, you might have a law, in the law it will state what a chemical hazard is, for example. It gives you classes of chemical hazards, but it won't tell you exactly how you should control that or eliminate it. It gives you a guideline as to how you can go about doing it, but you yourself need to actually then take the steps to mitigate or eliminate that risk. So essentially, every business should be looking at every first of all, at the work environment. So that's, your light, your noise, your air, chemicals, that kind of thing, anything that can affect health. And then you have to look at your machinery and equipment. And then the last thing you need to look at is who is using the machinery and equipment. Because, for example, if you're offloading a truck and you're a 6'5" man, that's, sort of 300 pounds, you can easily offload a 25 kilogram bag. But if you're a little lady, sort of 5'3" and, 50, 80 pounds, then you wouldn't be able to lift it. So when it comes to risk assessment, it's a little bit like how long is a piece of string, because it really depends on who's doing the job. So essentially, at some point, you have to get to a point where you're looking at all the tasks that are being carried out in your place of business and who's carrying them out, and make sure that those risks are covered. So it gets quite involved.
Well, this also helps me to understand why it would be much better to bring in somebody like you into a business to just have the assessment done, because very often as business owners we can't see all of these things. It might seem obvious once somebody gets hurt, but to look at all the various things that can go wrong must be quite a huge task.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because, there's been many studies on incident investigation and accidents over the years, way back into the sort of 1800s. And there was a triangle that was put together where it said, if you've got so many incidents, 2 million or whatever it is, then you'll get so many minor accidents and then so many majors, and eventually you'll end up with fatality. A lot of people take that to mean that, well, if I only have 2 incidents, then the chances of a fatality are minimal. But it actually is not that. The more incidents that you have points to the fact that your controls are not sufficient. So you really need to be looking at those close calls. We call them near misses in our industry. So how many times did somebody almost get injured? And how many times did somebody's finger just miss a needle, or how many times did somebody just nick a finger and it wasn't serious before they actually cut a finger off, or fall and get stabbed by a pair of scissors just to push the envelope. So yes, it's important to have a look at all possible risks and then decide for yourself what's the level. And obviously the more informed and the more competent your employees are, the less chance there is of incidents happening. So that for me is one of the big ones, is informing and making sure competence in terms of your employees.
So there's a training element that's required there.
Huge training element. It goes right through the act, it goes through all the regulations. So yes, competency is very, very important when it comes to reducing your number of incidents and reducing your risk.
Now, you mentioned that one of the barriers you feel that small businesses have is that they think it's going to be very expensive. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Look, if you're going to get an expert in to come and do everything for you, yes, it would become very expensive, over a period of time. Because I have a passion for SMMEs, I really feel for them. And I know that, they must sit there biting their fingernails sometimes thinking, oh God, one of these days something's going to happen and I'm going to be in big trouble. So for me, what I like to do is I like to have a combination of training the company and the management involved. So in other words, once a business owner knows what their responsibilities and accountabilities are in terms of health and safety and understand what to do, we can then teach them how to do a risk assessment. And if I can help with a baseline risk assessment, but when it comes to them actually they should be putting together their own risk assessment, and they can do it as a team. So, if it's yourself and 5 employees, you can actually sit down with your team and say, right, what could go wrong? And then you can draw up a risk assessment from there.
Yes.
What I do with small businesses, I normally say, set a budget. How much can you spend on health and safety every month? So let's say you can spend 1,000 Rand every month on health and safety, then I'll come along and say, right, I will come and I will give you 1,000 rands worth of my time, be it on site or be it through a Zoom meeting, and assist you in getting everything up and running. When I do it like that, then any documentation that I provide then comes free. Or you could go the other route and say, fine, I can go and read up on it myself. And I do have documents available that's sort of template documents that can be used, like a risk assessment template and guidelines for handling of hazardous chemicals, and various pieces of equipment, risk assessments and things like that, to help put together something that's not too expensive. But in the beginning, I think you tend to need to put a little bit of money into it. But once you know what you're doing and you're comfortable with, where your risks are, you can pretty much continue on your own after that, and it shouldn't cost you anything thereafter. But you always, again, have to compare that cost to if somebody is killed, and it's quite easy. If you've got a really busy workshop and somebody trips and falls and they smash their head against a table or a piece of equipment, they could end up with brain damage and die, and it has happened. And then of course you're sitting with a situation where you've got a family who then can make a claim against you.
Have you seen businesses close down in this way?
Yes. Yeah. Businesses have.
That's quite frightening. And it must be also quite a big thing for a business owner to go through that trauma,
It's also, if you have a look at it, take the Act, for example. The penalties in terms of the Act start with a fine of 50,000 rand for every single thing that's wrong. Wow. So, for example, the law requires that you appoint people to oversee your health and safety, because if you're a CEO, you're busy doing lots of things, you can't oversee it yourself. So therefore, you're required to appoint somebody to help you. It's called an assistant to the CEO, and that you can have many of those in different formats. You can have one that's coordinating health and safety. You can have another one that's an incident investigator, for example. So if you don't have, if you haven't allocated responsibilities and authorities in terms of what the law requires, then for each one of those, they can give you a fine. Wow. So it can quickly add up. Yeah. If you haven't got a risk assessment, if you haven't identified your risks and proven it, it doesn't say you have to have it written, but if you don't have a written risk assessment, how do you prove that you've actually done one? You've got to prove that you have informed your staff, you've communicated with them. You've got to prove that you have trained them, that they're competent to do what they do. You've got to prove that, for example, certain jobs have to be done under a supervisor. Supervision is a requirement under law. So a lot of people, for example, will employ somebody off the street and put them into a job, and that's it, off they go. And they're not watched. I know of a situation, for example, with a company was in agricultural industry. They got this chap off the street to come and burn the grass outside the front of the business, and essentially handed him some petrol and a couple of matches and said, off you go. And he got himself caught in the fire, and he actually burned to death. So things like that they get hidden. They don't get reported in South Africa. We have this ability to hide major crimes in South Africa somehow. They don't hit the headlines. I mean, overseas, something like that would be all over the news, you know what I mean? But in the country, not so much. But yes, if somebody dies on your watch, then you are, unfortunately at this point, you're only likely to get a fine of 100,000 rand and 2 years in jail. But the law is actually becoming a lot more strict, and the law is going to change pretty soon. It's busy being rewritten as we speak. In fact, it was meant to have been published 2 years ago already. I think there's a hiccup somewhere along the line with some of the regulations. And they're going to change that. That will be a 5 million rand fine and a life sentence. Wow. So, wow. Yeah.
And even 100,000 rand fine is a pretty big deal for a small business.
Well, and it's not the small business that's allowed to pay it. The individual concerned is liable for the fine.
Wow.
So So CEOs are held personally liable for employees. It's not that your business is held liable. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
That's a good one, yeah.
Who wants to be a CEO if that's the case?
Well, you've got to know what the laws are, and you've got to protect yourself. You really do. And again, reasonably practicable. If stopping somebody from cutting their finger is going to cost 500,000 rand, then the law doesn't expect you. It's not reasonably practicable. But how much is a life worth? So you really need to consider, if should I have spent 1,500 rand a month to get somebody to come in and help us get our health and safety up and running and make sure it's running perfectly well, against somebody dying. That's how the law would look at it.
And it does sound as though it's a process that you can get it to a point where, okay, now it's done, it's in place. So it's not 1,500 rand a month every month forever. It's just for a few months until you get all your systems in place, and then you can run on your own.
Yes, yeah. And like I say, I mean, there's various ways of skinning a cat, so they say. So if your business is small, the other thing to consider as well is, under COIDA, your compensation commission, if you are paying towards the compensation commission, even if it's just yourself. I know a chap who's a consultant. He's on his own. He's had 3 back operations because he fell at one of his clients, and he's had 3 back operations, all paid for by the compensation commissioner. So it's something worth considering, and making sure that you are compliant in terms of that, so that if something does happen to one of your employees, then you have recourse to help them, and that is a help to start with, and can save you a lot of money in the long run. But yeah, it depends on the complexity of your operation as to how long it would take. And also, I think, to me, it's a big question: are you a manager or are you a leader? Leaders can get things up and running pretty quickly, and if you train your people, they can all do it for themselves. If you're a manager and you really don't give a damn, then not so much. Things are going to go wrong. So yeah.
And what are the most common things that typically go wrong? Or is it all the things that you don't see coming that happen?
Typically, it's things like ignore. I'll give you a very good example. I was working at a mill one day, and I was actually there to attend their health and safety meeting, because the law requires, if you have 20 or more employees, you have to have safety reps, and if you have safety reps, you've got to have committee meetings. And I would advise anyway meeting with your staff on a regular basis to talk about health and safety, because they are the ones that can feed back things that have gone wrong if you encourage them enough. And it can be really a question of a half-hour meeting once a month to actually get your health and safety really where it should be. And I arrived for the meeting, and I walked past their storage area, and as I walked past one of the racking cages, I heard this almighty crash behind me, and I turned around, and what had happened was a forklift was loading on the other side of the racking, and had pushed a pallet with a couple of 50 kg bags of feed over the edge on the other side, because there was nothing to stop it going over, and he hadn't seen, because it was so high, he hadn't actually seen what was up there. And I got to the committee meeting, and I said, right, let's start. One of the things you have to discuss in your committee meetings is incidents. And I said, right, any near misses? And they all sat there and all shook their heads. No near misses. I said, you are really kidding me? I almost got crushed. I have 100 tons of feed, and there's no near misses. To me, I think, that is one of your most important things to look at, is what are you missing, and what could have happened. And there's so many examples. I mean, I've got videos up in the yin yang of near misses. So little things like paper cuts, for example. Paper cuts can be if there's a lot of small little hand in an office, for example, small hand injuries which don't really they go unreported. Could be because your personnel are stressed and under pressure, And it's something that has to be looked at in terms of the law. If you can't have your staff so stressed out that they're not looking after their own health and safety or don't have time for it. So it can be indicative of a management style. It can be indicative of organizational pressure and stress. And things like that actually, to me, are more likely to lead to incidents and accidents than if you've got a risk assessment in place, for example. So yeah.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Ergonomics is new in South Africa, so a lot of people don't really understand it. The regulation was promulgated last year. They've put a hold on it for the time being because it requires a lot. You know, like I said, it requires you to look at every single task, at every single employee, and find out, is there any organizational stress? Are they, you know, sort of working too hard, working too long? Are they tired? So there's a lot of things to look at when it comes to that.
Oh, and I can think of so many businesses where they drive their staff very, very hard.
Absolutely. And under the law, not allowed. Not
Okay.
allowed at all.
Okay. Wow, Deborah, you've given me a lot to think about today. And I'm certain that you've given those who are going to watch this video a lot to think about. If anybody would like to contact you directly to chat with you further, how can they do that?
They can. I do have a Facebook page. Professional Safety Risk Management is the name of my company, or you can put my phone number up and my email address up if you want, and they can contact me by email or give me a call.
Okay, I will include all of that information in the description of the video. If you will just send that to me when we're done talking.
Definitely, I'll do that. Yes.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That was amazingly informative.
Oh, there's still so much more. We didn't even crack the surface.
Oh, and maybe we can do some follow-ups where we can talk about specific topics if you'd like to.
Yes, and perhaps if anybody has any questions following, you know, specific questions that they're worried, things that they're worried about, if they want to put it onto my page or your page and just tag me on it, then perhaps I can just answer maybe a few, especially if it's things that happen often in your industry in particular.
Thank you so much for your generosity with your time. I appreciate it so much.
Only a pleasure. Thanks for having me.